What's up, friends of YouTube? Derek Van Diest here with Zaandam Music. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the beat Virtuoso, where I'm going to show you what instruments I used, the arrangement, the mix process, and the automation. So let's dive right in. Okay, so this is a pretty big file, so for demonstration purposes, I'm going to play the final MP3 file. So let's hear what the beat sounds like.
Zaandam Music.
Alright, and that's the episode, the beat. So now let's take a look at what instruments I used. So let's start with the bass. And I used an 808, and I also used a synthesized bass sound. So let me get into the mixer real quick and turn on the instruments. Okay. And one other thing I have to do constantly is turn on the effects because of the CPU. So let's turn off all these folders. Okay, so the 808. For the 808, I used, let me pull it up here. I used an instance of Contact. And the library that I used is the Trap Sinatra. Let me pull it up for you guys, it's taking a little while. There it is. Okay, so I'm using the Trap Sinatra Beat House from the Beat House Big Works, and I'm using the 808 Cookup preset. Okay. Now for the sub, oh, let me show you what the 808 sounds like. So I'll solo the 808. Alright, so that's the 808. And the other bass sound that I used is the synthetic bass. And for that one, I used Rob Papin's Subboom bass. And I used this preset here, Pearl Beach. And this is what it sounds like. Let me turn on the effects. Okay, so this is what it sounds like. Alright, so those are the two bass sounds that I used. So up next, let's look at the drums. So for the drums, I used a kick sound, and let me just turn on the effects for it. Okay, so I used two kick sounds. So for the first kick sound, I used a sample 1 with a Lil Skies kick number 5. And I'll show you here what it sounds like. Okay, so that's the kick, and I also used an 808 kick. So let me find where the 808 kick is here. For the 808 kick, I used a sample 1 with a Nick Myra pass bet kick. And I'm gonna show you here what it sounds like. Let me turn on the effects first. And the 808 kick plays throughout the hook sections, and the other kick plays in the verse sections. Okay, so up next I'm using a clap sound. For the clap sound, I'm using a sample 1 with Lil Skies clap number 3. And let me turn on the effects for the clap. Alright, and let's hear what it sounds like. Okay, that's the clap sound. Up next we have a snare sound, and for this one I'm using a sample 1 with Lil Sky snare number 6. Let's turn on the effects. And this is what that snare sounds like. Okay, up next I'm using a hi-hat. For the hi-hat, I'm using a sample 1 with Lil Sky's hi-hat number 2. And I'll turn on the effects. And this is what the hi-hat sounds like. Okay, up next I have an open hat. For the open hat, I'm using a sample 1 with Lil Sky's open hat number 1. Turn on the effects, and this is what the open hat sounds like. Okay, and up next I have a perk sound. For the perk sound, I'm using a sample 1 with Nick Myra deck perk. This is what the perk sounds like. Okay, that was the perk sound. So those are all the drums. And let me just close up the folder here. So up next we have the pianos. Let me open up the instruments here. Okay, that's better. Okay, so for the first piano, I titled it the Pianet T Retro Vibe. Show you what it is here. It's taking a little while to load. There it is, okay. So I'm using Keyscape Pianet T Retro Vibe setting. And I'll turn on the effects and show you what it sounds like. So this is what it sounds like. And this is the chord progression throughout the beat. Okay, so the next one is Rhodes Shimmer. Pull it up here shortly. It's always Omnisphere, Contact, and Keyscape are the ones that take forever. So here's Keyscape, the Rhodes Classic Suitcase Shimmer. That's the one I'm using. And this is what it sounds like. Let's turn on the effects. Okay. Okay, up next we have a Rhodes Lush. Pull it up here for you. And this is also an instance of Keyscape, Rhodes Classic Suitcase Lush. And I'll turn on the effects. Okay, this is what Lush sounds like. Alright. And that was the last piano sound. So up next we have the Enchanted Flute, and this is my favorite flute sound. This one's from Omnisphere. I'll pull it up here shortly. I've been using this flute on a lot of my beats recently. So Enchanted Flute from Omnisphere. This is what it sounds like. Okay, and that was the flute sound. So up next we have the pads. So the first pad sound is Lyle's Feather, and I'll pull it up shortly for you. This one's also from Omnisphere. This is from the Pads and Strings folder, Lyle's Feather, and this is what it sounds like. Okay. Up next we have a Choral FX. And I think this one's Omnisphere as well. Let's see. Yep. I used Omnisphere with, from the category Human Voices, I used Choral FX Slide Rev 2. And this is what it sounds like. Okay, and up next we have some effects. For the first one, I have an atmosphere, and for this I used just a sample. And this is what the atmosphere sounds like. I pulled it out of a sample pack, but I can't remember which one. Okay. And that's just an atmosphere sound. After that, I put a riser, and I'm using the Razer VST. with the chopped noise sweep preset. And this is what the Razer sounds like. Okay, and last effect is the beat tag, and this is the same beat tag that I always use. And this is what it sounds like.
Zaandam music.
And the last thing I did was a tape stop automation. And that automation takes place just here in the beginning, and I'll play that for you here.
Zaandam music.
Oh, that was weird. It didn't do it. Okay, well, I'll show you later on in the automation section. Okay, so let's see here. Up next, I'll just show you all the effects that I use. So for my reverbs, let me turn them all on here for you. So I use Valhalla Vintage Verb, and I'm using the drum plate preset. For my hall reverb, I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb Very Nice Hall. And for the room reverb, I'm using Altiverb 7, Sarm West Studio. For my first effect, I'm using a Pan Man with this default setting that I made. And the next one is an Echo Boy with the Space Rhythm preset. And now for the bus channels, I have the bass bus channel. And I'm gonna get into that with the mixer once I get into the mixer. So let me just get back into this here. Let's turn off all the folders. And since I just finished showing you all the instruments, I'm gonna get into the arrangement. So let's turn off the mixer. Okay, and I'm gonna bring it to tiny. Okay, so let me actually open everything up for the arrangement. It'll make it easier. Okay, and I'm also going to turn off all the transparent MIDI sounds so that because we don't need them, just to make some more room. There we go. Now everything's easier to see. Okay, so for the arrangement, I did an intro, 3 hooks, 2 verses, and an outro. Let me make this a little easier to see here. You can't really tell for the outro because my frame is in the way, but the outro is this small area here. That's all you really need to see. Okay, so for the intro, I started by introducing the Piano T Retro Vibe piano, and this is the chord progression that pretty much plays throughout the whole beat. For the second half of the intro, I introduced the Rhodes Lush, just to add variation to it. Lyle's Feather is the dominant pad sound that I have on this beat, and that plays throughout the entire beat. Also, the beat tag helps transition the intro to the hook. So the intro is very simple. Let me show you what. Well, I'll show you what the intro to the hook sounds like later when I talk about the automation. So for the hook section, I introduced the 808 along with all the drums and the atmosphere. So I have everything basically playing in the hook, because the reason for that is I want the hook to have the most energy. So I'm using an 808 for the hook, and I'm also using an 808 kick with that 808 so that they work well together. Let's see here. So from the hook to the verse, I'll show you to get there. And I dropped some of the drum elements, and I dropped the 808 as well. So this is what the transition sounds like. Oops, my bad. Let me unmute this. Okay, let's try again. So I also wanted to show you how the bass comes in here as well. So what I did from hook to verse, along with that transition, when I drop that 808, it loses a lot of energy. The snare gets taken out, so it's just the clap continues. Also, the hi-hats get taken out. So big drop in energy here, and I slowly start bringing it up as the verse progresses. So I add the bass here, the sub-boom bass, and then I drop it right before the hook. So this is what the transition sounds like from verse to hook. Also, I use the Razer, and I'll show you here what it sounds like. Also, one thing to note, all three of the hooks are exactly the same. Except the middle hook. The second hook doesn't have the atmosphere playing, that's the only difference. Now, for the verse, I'm going to go back to the verse. I wanted to have the flute play only in the verse sections. So that enchanted flute only plays in the verse. What else is there? I didn't really do much. The perk, I took it out just for the end here of the verse. And a lot of, like, the main reason why I move things around, take some out, add some stuff, is because if it was the same pattern all the way through, it would get kind of boring. So I try to mix it up. And alright, let's move on to the last part here. So I'll show you what the transition sounds like from hook to outro. And for the outro, I took out all the energy and just tried to keep it the same as the intro, but the only difference between the outro and intro is the atmosphere. So I have that. So here's what the transition sounds like. Also, pay close, like a little bit of shimmer due to the crystallizer effect, and I'll show you that later. But there should be some tail end reverb here. So let's play it through. Wow, so it goes on for quite a while. Alright, so that's basically the arrangement. So let's move on. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up the mixer here. Bring it up so we can see it better. Okay, so we're gonna start off with the what I did to the mix. So for the 808, I don't need to turn on the effects. Okay, so I started with a FabFilter Pro Q, and this is what I did to it. A decapitator, and all I did was raise the drive a little bit to add some distortion in the top end of that 808. I then added a virtual mix rack, and I use a virtual mix rack for I think all of my channels here on this project. So I have the virtual channel on the USA preset, and for all my projects, the only knobs that I touch are the input-output knobs, and I always switch it to USA. I also put an EQ in there to add some of the low end. Added a compressor from Studio One, and I put that compressor to sidechain the 808 kick to the 808. And that's it for the 808. For the sub-boom bass, the first thing I did was FabFilter Pro Q, and this is what I did to it. Then I added a virtual mix rack, virtual channel, and a little bit of the low end. Now let me turn on the instruments because I just want to make sure that I don't have anything else on it. Okay. So that's it for the bass sounds. For the drum sounds, for the kick, I started with a FabFilter. This is what I did to it. I then added a virtual mix rack, and that's all I did for the kick. For the 808 kick, I added a FabFilter Pro Q. I then added a virtual mix rack and a top end EQ. And I have that sidechain to the 808. For the clap sound, I have a fab filter with a low cut. I also have a virtual mix rack, and I added some revival to this with all the way up on thickness and shimmer. For the snare sound, let me just make sure here for the instruments that I didn't add anything. Okay. Cool, I didn't. So for the snare sound, I started with fab filter low cut. I then added a virtual mix rack with a lot of shimmer, a lot of thickness. Alright, and the next sound I used was a hi-hat. For the hi-hat, I started with a fab filter low cut. I then added the channel, some EQ, and a little bit of shimmer and a lot of thickness. For the open hat, I did a low cut. Also put in a virtual mix rack with just the revival and the channel. And last, we have the perk sound. For the perk sound, I used a low cut. And I used a virtual channel with revival, all the way, shimmer and thickness. Now for the drums, I always pan the drums. So for that perk, I panned it to the left, about 26 to the left. For the open hat, I panned it 13 to the left. For the hi-hat, 24 to the right. And that's it for the panning. Awesome, so let's move on to the piano sounds now. For the piano sounds, starting off with the Pianet T, I started with a low cut. There was a weird frequency in this range that I wanted to get rid of, and then I wanted to bring the high end up in this section because it wasn't loud enough for me. Next part, I added a virtual mix rack, some EQing, the same settings, and revival. I then added the Echo Boy, so that's what I did there. The next thing is the Rhodes Shimmer. For the Rhodes Shimmer, I did a low cut. I then did a virtual mix rack, some EQ, revival, and I did an Echo Boy as well, the same one. For the Rhodes Lush, I have a low cut, virtual channel with EQ and revival as well, just a little bit of shimmer and a little bit of thickness. And I have the Echo Boy as well. That's it for the pianos. Now for the flute, I have a low cut. I also have a virtual mix rack. And for this one I did some lift, custom series lift. I did some air EQ and some revival. And for the flute, I have the pan man routed to the flute. Now for the pad sounds, for the first one I have Laos Feather. First thing I did was a fab filter. I got rid of a frequency I didn't like, and I did pretty much the same thing here. Virtual mix rack with the same tools that I always use. Shimmer all the way up, thickness all the way up, some EQ, virtual channel. And I also put the Echo Boy on it as well. For the choir, the choral effects, I started with a low cut. I put in the virtual mix channel with all my tweaking of the EQ, revival. And then I put a crystallizer with the crystal builder. And I turned it down quite a bit to make it hardly noticeable. And I also put the Echo Boy on there as well. Now for the atmosphere sound, I have a low cut. I also have a virtual channel and revival all the way up. And I also routed the Echo Boy to that one. For the riser, I have just a virtual channel and revival. So this is the only one that I didn't EQ. This and the beat tag. Yeah, the beat tag I didn't EQ either. So that's all I did for the riser. For the beat tag, all I did was the virtual channel. And I also added an auto tune in E flat minor, which is the key of the beat. Alright, I showed you all the reverbs, I showed you all the effects. Now let's move on to the bus channels. For the bass bus channel, I started with a virtual mix rack. For this one I have the virtual mix bus, and I always put it in the Brit 4KE for the mix buses. Next, I used an ozone imager, and I turned down all the bands to make it fully mono for the bass. And I also put a room reverb on it. For the drum bus channel, all I did was add a virtual mix bus, some plate reverb, and a room reverb. For the instrument bus channel, I did a virtual mix bus and some room reverb. For the pads, I did a virtual mix bus, a room reverb, and a plate reverb. Boy, that's weird. It shouldn't be a plate reverb. Okay, that should actually be a hall reverb. So that was a mistake I made. The plate reverbs I usually put on my drums. So that's the hall reverb. For the effects, I have a virtual mix bus and a room reverb. Now, for my filter channel, I have a tape stop effect, and everything is routed to the filter, so everything gets affected by that tape stop. For the filter bypass, I don't have anything on it because I want everything to be affected by that tape stop. For the mix bus channel, I didn't use it for this project. And for the master channel, the only thing I used was an Ozone 8 equalizer. And I did this with brick wall settings, a high pass brick wall and a low pass brick wall, so that I can totally kill the frequencies and the areas that I just don't want them at. The other two are just visual plugins. Now let's see, that's everything for the mix process. Cool, so let's turn off the mixer. And let's finish it off with the automation that I was going to show you. So I did a tape stop automation, and I'll show you what it looks like here. I used a KHS tape stop, and these are the settings that I used on it. Now let me see if I can get it to work. First thing I need to do is mute this thing. Okay. And let me test it out here, see if it'll work for us. Oh, I know why, because I have it off. Okay, let's try it one more time. So the reverb's a little high. Turn that down a bit. Okay, so as you can see, that was the tape stop effect, and I only have it playing in this first section here, just in the beginning, from intro to hook. So I'll play it one last time. And I have it automated like that with these settings, so that it takes a little while to start, or to stop, and it starts back up instantly once the hook comes in. So one more time. Okay, and that was the only automation that I did. So with that, that's the whole beat. And that's everything. So I hope you guys enjoyed today, learned something new. And if you guys want to lease this beat and many others, you can go and check out my website, zaandammusic.com. And I'm going to be making more of these videos in the future. So I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.